I'm joined for this AI panel by Ras Agranat from Israel. Unfortunately, he couldn't join us in person. He is an assistant professor of law at the Harry Redzner. Did I say that right? Law
Something like
school.
that.
Yeah, okay. So, and, and actually, I did look at some of his recent papers, and they were quite interesting. I suggest you guys look at that. He does have some application of network science to refine the legal framework for the assessment of cases that involve such effects. Anna Tzanaki, to my left, is a senior lecturer in law at the University of Leeds. And she has a wide research interests, obviously in competition policy. And she is doing work in digital markets and new technologies. And Friso, to my right, is an assistant professor of competition law and digital regulation at Tilburg University, where I also spent a nice year at my postdoc. And he serves as a non-governmental advisor to the ICN network for the Belgian Competition Authority. So we have split the topics into kind of like 4 building blocks: AI partnerships, integration, I think it will kind of follow naturally, agentic AI and autonomy, and then, well, acqui-hires as well. So it's going to be 5, and technological sovereignty. And I'll just kick off with the first set of sort of questions or considerations on AI partnership. So we had the OpenAI Microsoft deal, and that was a big thing. But now we also have Amazon OpenAI deal. And I'm wondering whether, this is an indication that such deals are no big deal because, you can always multi-home. In fact, this was not a sort of merger between Microsoft and OpenAI because they are doing now the same thing with Amazon. So it could be a sign of a healthy competitive market. And I'm wondering whether it could also at the same time or alternatively be a sign of what is starting to emerge as a kind of tight compute oligopoly where the big 3 clouds have effectively enclosed the frontier model market. And in the view of that, and then I leave it to you, why are we seeing this type of AI partnerships? Whether on the one hand, private benefits of the firms and what are the competition benefits and risks of such partnerships? Maybe Anna, we start with you.
Great. Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here and to return back to the UI. Thank you for being part of this wonderful event and learning a lot. So yeah, it's a very interesting question. I mean, my work, it's very much on minority shareholdings. And so this was a natural area of interest. And it's very interesting, as you said, how OpenAI now slightly repositioned, and they don't rely only on Microsoft, but now they partner also with, Amazon. So I think why we see this and if this should be a concern. First, perhaps I should make a disclosure. What I'm going to say today is partly my views, but also the views of my husband, who is a tech lead for AI. So it happens that I can discuss this stuff with him. But what I'm trying to say is that some of the things that I will say try to bring some of the business and technology perspective. And actually, he made me understand these things much better. So whatever smart I say, it's thanks to him. And whatever is stupid that I say, please blame it on me. Okay, so I think it is to reply to your question in a nutshell, I think it's a sign of competition. And you can see this with this multi-homing idea. However, at the same time, perhaps we should be a bit concerned because it does seem a little bit like incestuous competition, if we can say like that. Why? I think Thibaut mentioned this yesterday, that, in a picture, you cannot make all these links visible. So we have all these partnerships and special agreements and it's very important to understand that all these partnerships are not the same thing. initially what OpenAI and Microsoft tried to do, perhaps it was closer to a merger. Perhaps we could see signs of some control, even indirectly, you know, through board seats and other governance opportunities that Microsoft would have. But these other partnerships look more like contracts, I would say. And then the good question is, why do we have these players that, on the one hand, you could say they have very strong positions in compute? Why are they so interested in having these strong partnerships with AI companies or players upstream and downstream? And I think that it is a sign of competition at this point in time, at least. And if we see it from the business perspective, why Amazon wants to, to have OpenAI on its cloud and platform, I would say that perhaps it was an exaggeration to say that Amazon needs OpenAI, but in a way they do. So the position that they have in compute, I think it's very fragile. And, you know, it's very, it's a very narrow view to see it from the perspective of the numbers of operators that we have in compute. And why I'm saying this, it's important to note that Amazon did try to create their own foundation model, and they didn't do so well, okay? And at the same time, so it's not that they completely fail, it exists somewhere, but they're not doing very well. So in a sense, I would say that Amazon needs OpenAI because as an end user, what you care is that, you know, you can have an integrated service. So they need a very strong player there that when they offer, when the user uses AI is not disadvantaged. So it's not that the fact that they only have the compute gives them that kind of power. If you see on the other hand, you know, OpenAI, of course, they also need Amazon or Microsoft in that case because they have compute, and compute is so essential, especially because it's so scarce and limited. So everybody wants compute right now. And then it's interesting, this idea of multi-homing, and it's not only OpenAI who does multi-homing, it's also Anthropic. So for example, we have Anthropic that is also using Google and Amazon. And then the question is, why would Google sell to Anthropic since they are also the only player that is completely vertically integrated? You know, if it's something that they have an advantage on, and you know, they could.
Anna, we'll deal with this
later.
Yeah, in the next question. I do.
So should I stop?
Yeah.
Okay, I'll stop.
If you have some big point to make on this one, finish it.
Okay.
Because I want to give the opportunity to Raz and Friso.
Maybe I'll stop here and then I can continue later.
Friso, let's have your thoughts.
Okay, great. Well, yeah, these partnerships, kind of tricky because they're very tangible benefits, that's clear. The risks are more difficult to grasp. I mean, in a way, maybe this is the inverse of many mergers where there's sort of clear static risks, but the dynamic benefits are more difficult to grasp. And of course, here the risk is some co-option of innovation by, well, big tech of these new startups, to use the term of Mark Lemley. But I think Anna made an interesting point about sort of, well, who needs this more? Is it these big tech players, often with their own compute, or is it these upstarts that, of course, are reliant on it? And at first, when she said, well, say Amazon needs this, I thought it was kind of a crazy point. But then if you go down the list, I mean, there's something to it, right? Apple very publicly failed in AI and then had to rely on first OpenAI, later now Google's Gemini. Microsoft is only in the game because of OpenAI in the first place. Meta had a moment with Llama, but that quickly passed, and then they had to throw 100 million pay packages at engineers from OpenAI and Anthropic to, you know, save their AI project. So there's something to that. Of course, what does competition policy have to do with that? I mean, competition policy shouldn't be invested in their survival. That wouldn't be a very dynamic way to look at it. And you could also think about the counterfactual, of course. Without these partnerships, I mean, we see the disappearance of these firms. I mean, probably not. Maybe they'd make a real effort at these at getting up to the state of the art in foundation models, and we'd instead see more competition. I think if we do look for the benefits to justify these partnerships, it's mostly at the upstart level, where especially at an earlier stage, I think when compute was constrained, where there's only 3 hyperscalers, and of course they were the ones willing to provide it. Perhaps they're willing to spend big also because they feared displacement. I think now we're at a different stage in the game where both private capital has come into this, even public markets might be an option. So I think the concerns there have largely abated through non-exclusive partnerships and so on. We're going to more of a mix and match situation. As indeed Ben Schroeder also pointed out yesterday, which is true for all types of businesses. So yeah, that's my view of the situation here and how concerns have evolved.
Right. So is there maybe actually some risk that the foreclosure is not by the big cloud operators, by the hyperscalers, but instead by the more advanced and well-performing foundation models in this case?
I mean, that's maybe taking it too far, because I think, point Thibault also made yesterday, at the foundation model level, we do see a lot of, both static and dynamic competition. Well,
right, but nothing from Amazon, nothing from Apple, nothing from Facebook. You would imagine that after all these billions and hiring the top-notch talent, they would have made it. But maybe that's not how innovation works.
Yeah.
Anyway, okay,
that's right.
Good. Raz, let's have your thoughts.
Okay, so I think yesterday we started off the conference by, I think Nicolas said it, asking the right question. And to me, if the question is whether it's an oligopoly or a healthy competitive situation, maybe the question should be, or let me rephrase it. Maybe it's a healthy oligopoly. Okay, we also discussed the oligopoly now diagnosis, right? If the situation is bound to be oligopolistic, and we're dealing with scarce resources in order to pursue, long-term innovation in this sphere, so maybe these collaborations are necessary in order to pursue innovation at a faster pace. So I personally think that the benefits here outweigh the competitive risk. So that's my position.
Okay, let's move to, yeah, sure, please do. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. I want to make perhaps one point that it's interesting to think, and as I said before speaking to my husband, I haven't realized myself why we see these partnerships and like why Amazon wanted OpenAI to be on its platform. I think it's interesting to see how much money these companies have spent to invest on the foundation models, but also by Amazon having OpenAI to buy compute for them, having this partnership with them, they know that the money that they're paying them, all these investments, it will directly come back to them through buying compute through them. So they have nothing to lose and they only have to win. And why am I saying that? You can think of two levels, perhaps here. Amazon, is in a more concentrated market, the cloud market, or layer, but it's more commoditized. Okay, so the competition there between the 3 players could be quite significant. At the same time, the foundational model level is not commoditized. Okay, and which means that this is a much more innovative market. Okay, and from that point of view, for Amazon, it's important that they get along these partners who are present on the foundation model to make sure that people stay on their cloud. And why I'm saying this is so important. Right now, there is a lot of interoperability. So if you want to change the AI model that you're using, it's very, very easy. But maybe the end game of these partnerships, right now it's indeed very uncertain. There's high risk, maybe there's a lot of innovation. So all these motivations, but what Amazon perhaps in the back of their mind, they also want to do is, they're not just a cloud, they're also an application engine. So whereas it's so easy to switch which foundation model you use, it's very more difficult if for applications that are written on that cloud to switch. So if they embed that position, then it's a different story. So perhaps they want to partner with some people like OpenAI and other strategic partners that they can make sure that the developers write applications for them and not for someone else. And then the switching costs are much harder in that case.
Right, except we have Azure partnering with OpenAI and Amazon now with OpenAI. So this kind of like seems to kind of ensure sort of, multi-homing also by way of applications. Good points, thank you. So, okay, let's actually look at Google now, right? Google is, I think, the only firm that owns the entire vertical stack. It has proprietary processing units, TPUs, the GCP cloud, the Gemini model, and it's kind of like at the forefront according to most tests. And then it has the very important Android distribution layer. And I have actually, when exploring for this panel and researching, seen that Gemini runs significantly cheaper on Google's own TPUs, and that's a big difference. Does this vertical integration create an efficiency mode that no rival can ever cross? The Commission would love to hear this question. And is there a world in which we would want to treat compute as essential facility? Friso, why don't you start?
Thanks. Yeah, I mean, first off, it's great to have Google in the game as sort of the only real big tech incumbent contestant. I think there's also indeed a risk, as you say, but here it would be good to distinguish between business customers and consumers, which are very different, especially in the AI space, I think. I mean, businesses are obviously more savvy customers. They will mix and match according to their needs. I mean, again, this is the point that Ben made yesterday. So there we have plenty of competition with perhaps Claude gaining a lead these days, but I'm not too worried about that part of the market and Google's position there. Of course, consumers are much less savvy. Sometimes or often, if you look at the empirical evidence, they're rather lazy in digital markets. They use what is served to them. So if you then have an integrated player like Google who, serves every customer with an Android phone, the Gemini model, but also is able to put Gemini in iOS, the other mobile ecosystem, because, again, Apple can figure it out. So they had to rely on Google. Well, then all of a sudden, I think at least on that consumer side, there may be somewhat of a cause of concern. This is a bit of a rerun of, the Google-Apple search deal and all the Android deals on the other side, especially because for consumers, AI gets the greatest value when it's personal, right? So Google is now rebranding it as personal intelligence because exactly due to that vertical integration, it can tap into all the data that it has in Gmail, other services. So I mean, for now, business is of course in AI where the money is. So maybe it's not the short-term concern, but I think if there's going to be a sort of bottleneck here, it's not going to be found at the foundation model or even the compute layer. I think it's rather the distribution layer to consumers.
I agree. I think we'll see a case soon on that.
Oh yeah,
yeah, I think so. Because no, I don't. But it's much more. It seems something that is actually whereas I was buying the argument competition is one click away on search, I think it's probably going to be more difficult to convince people that this flies when it comes to kind of AI shifting. But anyway, that's my view. Anna.
Thank you. I mean, in a way, I agree. And building on Friso's point, that, you know, it's unlikely to have a bottleneck at the foundation metal or compute. It is very interesting that, you know, Google, as you say, has this advantage, and it's the only real player that is completely vertically integrated. And the question here is, if they have this advantage, why do they provide, you know, a space to Anthropic? Why do they work with them, you know? Because in a way, you could see that Anthropic running on Google TPUs, you know, they could be disadvantaged in a way, so they could never do better than Google. So it is, again, an open question why this is happening. At the same time, we have to see it from the reverse point of view, given what we said about the partnerships and this highly competitive, uncertain space that we operate. Because if you know, like thinking from Anthropic side, that Gemini, due to this cost difference, apparently, they are doing better, then perhaps you would have some disincentives to buy compute from Google, which means that although Google has this very strong position and it's vertically integrated, they also run a risk, which means they have to be very careful how much advantage they give to their own AI. And I have an example here again to give. Again, the credit goes to my husband for this, but he explained to me a parallel between Samsung and Google phones. So, you know, when Google entered the business of phones and it was completely vertically integrated, they had to be very careful and structure very carefully their contracts in order not to hurt their relationship with Samsung. Samsung was obviously pissed that they entered that business. And, you know, Samsung was running on Android software as well. So they had to be sure that they don't sell too many of those phones. And so that edge would not hurt the relationship with Samsung that was such an important strategic partner for them, essentially. So if they want to remain competitive in the compute, then they kind of have some kind of soft market discipline from their customers, which creates an incentive not to take too much advantage of that vertical integration.
I think that's a good point. Yeah. Russ, what are your thoughts on this?
Okay, so first of all, I think we should be very careful when discussing efficiency modes. Antitrust law should be about promoting efficiency and welfare. And if Google, you know, managed to create this kind of synergy in a manner that brings so much benefit, that's a good thing. Now, I also doubt the descriptive claim empirically. I think this kind of synergy is very short-lived as of now, and I'm not convinced. There are very few, historically speaking, there are very few modes that haven't been breached in the tech sector within, you know, a decade or so, maybe two. So it's not, you know, a dinosaur we're talking about. And I also think that the efficacy of antitrust law to intervene here is very limited. So if we do want to pursue, you know, if we do think there is a competitive risk, you know, some entrants won't be able to enter the market effectively and, you know, in a way that fosters innovation and, you know, better technologies will reach the market, then we need to pinpoint exactly in the supply chain where access is needed and exactly how to mandate it in a way that won't harm the incentive to create this kind of synergies. I personally believe that the ability of Apple or Microsoft or whoever to create a similar synergy, not exactly the same one, but a similar one, a comparable one, and you know, to push back against Google is considerably better than the ability of antitrust law, certainly in the US, but I also think in the EU, to push back against this kind of, you know, a synergy. And again, I think for the last, I think, decade or so, we're always discussing Google as like the prime example of a company who's actually has, simply put, the best products out there, right? So Google search was the best product out there for a long while. Android, you know, depending how you measure it, but was probably the best, the most successful product out there. So again, if there are synergies, I don't think we should be too hasty to intervene here.
Okay. Any thoughts, Anna, on this? No, but that's fine. We don't have a lot of time. So we move on to agentic AI. So we're shifting from chatbots to agents in the sense that AI systems are now capable of sort of planning, using tools and executing multi-step tasks independently. So that there have been sort of competition policy concerns that have been raised in relation to agentic AI of a different nature than for chatbots. So what are the trade-offs that we should be mindful of when designing competition policy in relation to AI agents? Friso, why don't you start?
Yeah, thanks, Gregor. Yeah, this has been favorite topic of mine. I've been doing some research on this with Jan Kremich, an information scientist from the University of Passau. Of course, with AI agents, I mean, you have to look a bit to the future. Sure, we have some prototypes. Every major AI model has an agent mode, but this is very, very early days. But over the longer term, and of course, it's difficult to predict. I mean, listening to Brian Archer yesterday, I was reminded of, yeah, it's impossible to predict the future. But I think it could be a really dynamic force, not only in the AI space, but beyond it. Because imagine that AI agents, you know, do the shopping for you, do your searching, and so on. So what changes? I think right now the main reason to use the major tech platform is that they reduce the transaction and search costs, right? But those become immaterial if you have an AI agent doing all the searching and transacting for you. So that's not a great news for them. Also, advertising is certainly targeted advertising, perhaps less so brand advertising, might lose some relevance. If again, you ask your agent to buy the best product, maybe that does away with just the impulse purchases based on some Instagram ads you've seen. So this may refocus competition in a way on price, quality, innovation rather than visibility, which has become sort of one of the main parameters in the digital economy. Although, again, you might say, well, we'll just go from search engine optimization and ads to some agent optimization and advertising. I think, you know, we're seeing the first kind of competition relevant instances of this now. For example, there was the episode where Amazon sued Perplexity to get its agent, its shopping agents, to stop going over its marketplace to look for products for consumers. So they clearly see that, you know, a world in which shoppers use their agents rather than doing it themselves is not great if you're a platform just aggregating supply. But it's not quite competition relevant in the sense that it's a case for enforcement. I think many of these problems will solve themselves in a way. If agentic shopping becomes big, I guess either Amazon comes into the fold or they try to do their differentiated own more close thing, and those models can coexist. But yeah, it's a space to...
So extreme disintermediation. Does that mean that kind of the power moves from what with, you know, Amazon to kind of the platform that orchestrates the agentic AI? And, you know, it could be Google, it could be Microsoft.
Yeah, I think those sort of operating system-based platforms are a bit in a better position because I don't want to anthropomorphize AI too much, but they have to, an agent also has to live somewhere, right? And that's likely a place where you have good internet connection, maybe some local compute, maybe access to data of the user, maybe access to other tools or apps as well. Maybe something that people carry around all the time. So yeah, that's a phone, right?
Okay.
So unless we see competition in that space where some AI new native device enters, and of course, OpenAI is very much trying to do that by buying the Jony Ive design firm, the guy responsible more or less for the iPhone. So unless we also see real dynamism in that layer, I think likely the mobile platforms are a bit more insulated from that agentic change.
Right, and in that case, we should probably consider if problems start appearing, mandating some kind of interoperability. What's your position on that?
Yeah, that's a tough one because interoperability is difficult for many reasons, but here also, of course, for a very technical one. I mean, the integration would have to be pretty deep, underlying, sort of at system level, other apps, user data, and making that work in a partnership model is going to be very difficult. Although perhaps we're seeing the first examples now with Google and Apple. So if they can do it, perhaps there's an opportunity. Also because standards are starting to arise, of course, in this space, the model context protocol being one. Apple has its own app intents model. So, there's certainly some room for standardization. It'll never be quite at the same level.
But obviously way too early, right? We need to wait and see. Ras, over to you. You're on mute.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, cool. Okay, so not to shamelessly promote, but a year and a half ago, I published a short piece on this with Michal Gal, which was wonderfully edited by T-Bolt. And we raised the concern that AI agents may be characterized by network effects simply because suppose you have, an agent that represents, consumers vis-a-vis some retailer. That agent will go to the retailer and tell him, listen, I represent, 1 million consumers, you better give me a better price. And if you think it's true and, recursively, then the more consumers that agent will represent, the better that price is going to be. So, and the same is true to retailers. I mean, you can switch, the side. So I think that Friso, I agree with Friso that AI agents will compromise the power of platforms. And maybe they will also become platforms themselves further down the line. Of course, depending on access to data, access to the platforms, and so on. Too early to tell. I do think there's an interesting question of what happens when AI agents start, talking to one another. That creates a very dynamic, intriguing questions, right? What happens if one AI agent, does some task better than another AI agent, and they relay right those tasks to one another? What happened in that kind of a world? For example, consider remedies. We often try to think of with distinguishing between different firms, right? But if the AI agents are communicating and it's under the radar of regulation, maybe even under the radar of the firms themselves, then we're in a very complicated world, and I think it's too early to tell. I don't propose intervening legally yet, but definitely worth monitoring the situation.
Okay, Anna, to you.
I think I'll agree with some of the points made. So I'll try to. Thank you. Okay, so I'll try to say something in addition to what was already said. I mean, on your question about the interoperability, perhaps, this, what Friso said about standardization, we can also think that perhaps there is demand for such interoperability by the users already, and that will drive or force the orchestrators to run rival services in ecosystems, what we have now with foundation models in a way. So maybe it's not the best commercial strategy to go that way from that point of view. And then, I can also thinking of how, if this is a concern, how we can think about, addressing potential self-preferencing issues if they arise in this space. There are different options. One would be, this, what you discuss, a more heavy-handed approach would be, to involve the user. And in that case, there is a tension here. If you intervene and you impose, let's say, I don't know, Apple to have more providers or choices and stuff like that, you kind of undermine the user experience, which is not what the agents are really about. So you undermine the product and the autonomy essentially of the agent. So, and its performance. So maybe this is not the best option from that point of view. However, going reversely against this intermediation point that Friso also made, perhaps we can think that we can create an auction, an intermediary that aggregates option, and then the agent would have to go through them to choose and force Apple that, but they cannot directly go to the seller and have these special agreements that perhaps they prefer, and perhaps they do that obscurely also without the consumer knowing that, which creates concerns. And another possibility perhaps is that the market sorts itself, as I said, that, there are some of these players that present themselves as more independent to customers, and customers just prefer that. And so you can see it as a quality feature of competition. And then lastly, I think it's very important that we encourage disclosure in general, but also of special agreements that these that they may exist, and they may, behind the scenes promote that self-preferencing, which is not obvious to consumers. And picking up on Raz's point about agents talking to agents, perhaps we could then, if we have such a disclosure, perhaps we could think that we could have an agent to oversee the agent, let's say, and control if things were done the right way, if the best offer was offered to you. So it could be both a good and a bad, I think, to leave you with a more optimistic note.
Okay. All right. So let's move to a sovereignty point. Do we in Europe need our own compute stack? That is, do we need to pursue technological sovereignty to be able to sort of compete effectively and survive in that competition with, say, US and China? Or, as I tend to think, is all hope already lost? And if so, what can we do to minimize the damage? Raz, what? Yeah, it's a leading question. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, okay, fine, guilty.
Well, I'm from Israel and the States, so like I'll try not to tell Europe what Europe should do. But I do think.
Well, you guys tend to tell us all the time. So why don't just
no,
yeah.
God forbid, God forbid. I think that there should be definitely a switch of gears in how the US and the EU pursue AI technology. I think, I wasn't sure if I was supposed to prepare a slide or not, so I kind of did just in case. But I wanted to start it off with a quote by Eric Schmidt. And Eric Schmidt discussed with the US Congress the race for AI between the United States and China. And he said that China was very close, and it's very important that the United States will put all of the necessary investment in power plants, nuclear power plants. Like he said, we should build 150 nuclear power plants by decade's end, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And China is very close. And if we truly are in an AI race, and at the end of the rainbow of AI technology lies the super intelligence, which have profound implications to the economy, national security, and so on, then there should be radical thinking involved here in how to win that race. And what I want to talk briefly is a previous race. So Artemis 2 is supposed to splash down later today. I think it's appropriate to discuss Apollo for a moment. The Apollo spacecraft was built by a bunch of private firms. For example, the lunar module by Grumman, the command module by North American Aviation, different stages of the rockets, partly by Boeing. By the way, Boeing acquired all of the above. And there was a dedicated agency to pursue this. And that agency is NASA. It wasn't the DOJ or the FTC or the EU Commission, the purpose of which was to regulate and to hold back and to make sure there are no harms, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. The purpose of this agency was to coordinate the efforts of the private sector, the independent efforts of the private sector, in order to make sure that by 1969, we land a person on the moon. And maybe we should start thinking about the AI race in a similar fashion. We need to set a milestone for the development of AI and think of how to coordinate efforts in the EU, in the US, hopefully throughout the Western world, and win the race. And I think if we pursue this line of reasoning a bit further, there are many policy implications here. It means that, we discussed sharing cloud services between major firms. Yeah, we should do that, right? Because we allowed previously a bunch of aviation companies that competed over fighter jets and, top-notch national security instruments to coordinate and share technology to make sure we win the right race. So maybe it's a bit of a radical thinking here, maybe a bit far off.
Manhattan Project.
But I think we should consider, a different route here to make sure we don't wake up one day and discover that the entire world is ruled by some AI, the owner of which is not exactly democratic.
Right. So Ras, you're saying that it's the Manhattan Project moment for Europe, but I think you're assuming that we sort of trust the US, that we should do this together. And I was kind of like assuming that we're in competition with US or potentially in competition with US. Based on that, can we do something, or should we just say, okay, no, you know what? In Greenland.
I think trust is relative. Maybe trust should be relative across the globe, but I would hope that welfare-seeking countries, democratic countries, will be able to collaborate on a project on this scale, given the significance. And by the way, for the best of mankind, AI technology will bring tremendous upside, right? So for the best of mankind, we should think of how to steamroll and unleash this power, for all of us.
Right. Anna.
Well, thank you. I mean, I agree in a way with Ras that, we think to think a little bit broadly and, the interplay of industrial policy, perhaps with competition. But directly on your question about if, this is something that we need, I think definitely if we can, it's another question. So let me take a step back. I mean, right now, we don't have European companies that create the hardware and very few that do the software in the space. And this is a problem, especially, for the chips. We all rely on the Taiwanese. This is a problem that, by the way, also the US has. So it's not only unique in the EU. However, I think it's important. I mean, I think Professor Luke said this yesterday, that, we made this strategic decision to move assets overseas for cost implications, but we didn't see the long term. And that long term has changed quite dramatically. So now, what was thought not to be a strategic asset, now it's a huge strategic asset because, if you think that these AI firms, what they have in mind is to create not just, a commercial model, but general intelligence, artificial general intelligence, then whoever has that, it will be very powerful. So de facto here, the stakes are very high, and not only, in economic terms, but also geopolitically. And the question then is how we do it. Should we just, there are discussions in Europe whether we should encourage public investments for this to grow and so on. So maybe. But I want to say two things here. Perhaps for compute and software, maybe Europe can come back. Here, we have been leaders in these fields. You know, there are European companies that were active and quite strong. Some of the names were mentioned yesterday, you know, Philips, Nokia, Ericsson, and so on.
Well, not in compute. None of these firms were ever any big players in compute or software. Yeah.
I mean, the point is that we had built the core and we lost it. When we discuss about the other part, the AI, we were never even in that race. And my point here is to say that, you know, we were not leaders here. And the problem is that even if we invest and we build the computer or the software, we still have the innovation problem, which is what this conference is about. And in innovation, we're not so good. Like, it's something that we have a huge gap. It's about know-how. We don't know how these things operate, perhaps. And there, it's not perhaps a money problem. It's not that investment will just solve that. So it's not a magic, you know, we don't have a magic solution. And then it's a much more risky game and a much more uncertain.
So perhaps there are factors. We spoke also about some kind of geographic aspects, agglomeration, and then I think finance is, however, also an important part. We know that private investment are an order of magnitude, you know, in US compared to EU, and I think some other regions are also
but again,
far advanced.
Picking up on the point about uncertainty, and I think it was Professor Christopher Wu who was saying this, I don't know. You know, Qualcomm, they say they succeeded. There were these other much bigger companies who presumably had more money. So it's not a money problem.
Right. I think there's all sorts of different types of innovation, and you can find successes of this another way. Ras, you have in Israel, as we heard yesterday, a very vibrant sort of entrepreneurial, innovative environment, and it's not a big country. It's not a, you know, incredibly rich country. It's an incredibly innovative country. What's your take on that? I mean, what have you guys done differently from, you know, what we're doing in Europe? What is that drives this dynamism?
Okay, so in Israel we refer to this as Silicon Wadi. Okay, this is like the joke term for that. And I think there are many answers, but I will give only two. The first is it's considered an advantage in Israeli culture to fail. Okay, so if you get someone to your startup and he had 3 previously failed startups, that's actually an advantage. It means he brings experience and he will know how not to fail the next time. And I think in some cultures that is more frowned upon. The second thing is that I think that in Israeli society there is a very non-hierarchical mindset. So I can tell my boss that he's flatly wrong and we shouldn't do this, and he will generally listen. Now I am not saying it's not this case, you know, throughout the entire EU or the entire US, nothing of the sort, but I think those are two tremendously important driving forces. As to why the Israeli, you know, tech sector thrives, I will say this is despite of our government and not because of our government. Okay, I honestly have the government generally does not interfere in the tech sector, and
so it's not a competition policy issue. You say it's a mix of other things.
Mainly hands off, hands off. I will also note that, you know, it's not that Israel necessarily performs, you know, the deep research and, you know, brings the next, you know, giant company that will, right? Many of the Israeli startups, their end game is to be acquired and you know, by some, you know, major firm, and then we hear about the next one. So it's kind of an ecosystem of startups, and hopefully, I hope it will continue to be sustained.
Okay. Friso, you're the final, and then we conclude.
Oof, okay. No pressure. Well, let me take a step back, because sovereignty is very much a political question, right? It's sort of in an internationally connected system, which makes it, well, a complex system, to steal the analogy of Fred earlier today. To give just one example of this, in the Netherlands a couple of months ago, the government took control of Nexperia, some chip maker, subsidiary of a Chinese company, apparently because of some executive shakeup that rubbed some people the wrong way. Reporting says that might be at the behest of the Americans, who had their own sanctions and export control issues in that area. So, which then, of course, led China to retaliate. And of course, they have great power to do so. They control rare earth metals. So that could quickly spiral. But just to show how, yeah, even this simple affair, of course, went all across the globe in a complex interaction. I mean, because it's complex, of course, that's not a reason to not do anything. I think sovereignty, I mean, some amount of sovereignty is crucial. I think historically, non-sovereign nations have not done very well. And these days, technology is an important part of that sovereignty. So if only for that reason. Of course, yeah, it's expensive. It costs financial, but also a lot of political capital. So you do need to figure out, I think, two things. First, well, choose the area where it matters. And second, and that goes to your point, where there's still a chance, where it's not completely lost. And this is, more or less also the prescription of Draghi. The difficulty is, of course, identifying where those two things are true. I think, yeah, you can go over chips, foundation models, cloud. I don't think the cases, depending on each criterion, are too strong there. Either because, like with foundation models, maybe these get commoditized and it doesn't matter so much to control the cutting edge. With something else like chips or clouds, well, yeah, there maybe it's more the criterion that it's already close to lost.
And if we have to sacrifice consumer welfare to achieve this level of sovereignty, so be it. We're at war, right? And we have been for the last 10 years.
Yeah, there are going to be trade-offs, right? And 5
to 10 years.
I mean, if this becomes or is a matter of, say, national security, you might trade off some gains on national security against gains on consumer welfare.
How isn't it? Van der Leyen is telling us it is.
Sorry?
How is it not the matter of national security? Commissioner Van der Leyen is telling us for years that it is.
Well, I mean, in certain sectors it is, which ones you can disagree about. But yeah, this is more the defense kind of thinking, right? We want some resiliency, maybe not win in a certain sector, but at least have an alternative to fall back on if some allies are no longer, so willing to provide.
All right. Do we have a time for one question? Nicholas, I'm looking at you. Yeah? Okay. Or comment? Okay, yes, we have. Alvarez.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I have just a question and a comment. I think we all agree that the level of innovation in Europe is insufficient. I think it's hard to disagree with that. It's also hard to disagree with numbers. The R&D investment from the private sector in Europe is significantly lower than the US. The reaction that we have seen from regulators and governments has been a combination of adding red tape and making acquisitions more difficult. Remember, the only reason venture capital invests in a startup is because they one day hope to sell that company to somebody else. When you make that harder, you don't incentivize public investment. The acquisitions that I have seen in Israel are almost invariably easy. That's not true in Europe. I get some of the FDI issues that we have to protect. However, the system that we have now doesn't work. It takes too long to get deals done. There is way too much uncertainty. The question that I have is, what can we do to fix that other than just getting rid of the system, which obviously is way too radical?
Who wants to take that? Friso, will you have first go?
Yeah, Sure. I mean, I think acquisitions are maybe part of the picture, but I think overall it's a smaller part, at least from a sovereignty angle, right? I think completing the single market, especially when it comes to capital and services, I think there's much more gains to be had there rather than the more, I think, marginal gains from either allowing acquisitions more easily or indeed blocking some acquisitions if they, harm EU sovereignty. I think indeed innovation is the key, and to promote that, acquisitions play a role, but rather the whole sort of business ecosystem. I think there's larger parts of that are outside of the acquisition sphere.
Right. Okay. So, but in a way, even if money comes from abroad, from countries which have effective financial systems, such as the US, that would, if we allowed these buyouts to go ahead, it would spur investment, wouldn't it? And it's kind of like it's easier to do than to unify the financial market overnight, right? It's a matter of changing the guidelines.
Yeah, I mean, it's tricky to say, right? Yesterday, I think somebody brought up the example of Google acquiring DeepMind. Indeed, I think that's a very positive example. And of course, there's so much idiosyncrasies guiding that, right? The DeepMind founders were very clear that they wanted to stay in the UK, and Google wanted DeepMind so badly that they agreed with that. I don't think you can take that as a model for every acquisition.
Okay. Yeah, so Christopher.
I'm building on what Alvaro said. So I want to throw out a conjecture that I've always had, and I'd love the European reaction, which is I often hear the lagging in innovation in Europe blamed on the lack of a venture capital infrastructure here. I've always suspected, my intuition is different, is that capital is quite mobile in the global economy and will find its way to where it needs to go. The problem, the reason is that an alternative explanation of why it may not be coming here is the returns aren't there. And that may be a function not even just on blocking of acquisitions on exit, but just the overall regulatory structure consistent with the warnings that Draghi has done. And I find myself, is there any way we can weigh the contribution of the overall profitability incentives versus the lack of the physical infrastructure for finance? Because it seems that the fixes are completely different depending on what the problem is.
Anna, do you wanna take this?
I can try to give a combined answer, let's say, to Alvaro's and Christopher's point. I think it's super important. We have a tendency in Europe to think of policy in siloed ways, and I think we need to think more holistically, as you say. And I think VC is a huge part of the problem to begin with. So completing the single market and other initiatives that the Commission does, the 28th regime and related, initiatives are very, very important. Now, why we don't have VC in Europe? I think, it is related with this single market idea. In the US, there is more certainty of the institutional environment. In the EU, merger control is one piece of that, but it's not the only one. So there is uncertainty, there are too many regulators, there are a lot of overlaps. It's not clear. VC wants to know 5 lines and be very sure of what the bottom line is. And I don't think European companies working cross-border can give them that answer so easily. And I say that again, from the perspective of my husband that had many startups and they had always this VC problem. And at some point we're active in the US and it was so much easier. He was telling me that there were companies with worse technology, but they had access to that money and their life was so much easier. Here we don't have that, unfortunately. So I think the VC question is huge. And what competition like merger policy can do about it? I do think that you could think that there is perhaps a fear that translate into a bias for organic growth versus growth via merger, you could almost say. And I would go for the solution that Professor Jani also suggested that, we need to think of commitments more creatively. And we've seen this happening already in the UK. Now they know they're on their own. Growth will not happen just like that. And, they allowed this Vodafone 3 mergers with commitments that incentivize investments in the long-term infrastructure and things like that, which I think it's things that we want. So we don't want to create a trade-off between competition and growth or innovation, but we should think smartly about it, I think. Thank you.
I just wanna, Christopher, also a short comment. I do agree very much. Money goes where the returns are, and you know, whichever money, it just goes there. I think it doesn't go here because there are not returns. The question is why. One answer is scale, which has to do with integrated market, which it is not, European market, for so many reasons, including maybe in some way because of dysfunctional or not sufficiently forward-thinking competition policy. But frankly, it's a third-order factor, not even a second-order factor. Look, yeah.
Well, this is not a critique, Greg, but I thought this session was about AI and competition, and I would have liked to hear much more on copyrights, as Nicola mentioned it already yesterday in relationship to Mistral, etc. And if you look at the issue now with respect to copyright, we are on the verge of the dying of Wikipedia. We have the media, the traditional fake media being more or less in an incredibly concentrated fashion all over the place. So I would like to hear much more. What are the implications of the scenarios you described for the existing information transfer, the neutrality of that information, and more generally competition in the media sector?
Yeah, that's an excellent point, and it's all my fault. I didn't take the panelists in the right direction. Just a quick one. In US, apparently, a lot of these questions are being fast resolved. The fair use doctrine goes through in a way that economists, anticipate it. So it's kind of like, it goes in the direction that makes sense to me. In Europe, I think we have a big issue because of the completely different approach to copyright through a set of, exceptions, which are not flexible enough, in my view, to actually, produce results dynamically looking and as the environment is changing. So I think we'll have an issue there until and when the courts explain how these exceptions are applied. Again, one other feature of European thinking is very different than thinking in the US. Okay, look, thank you. Please join me in thanking the panelists.